Hey guys, it's Looch. A couple weeks back, we were talking about rock documentaries that you could get lost in, and one of our listeners had suggested a documentary I'd never heard of. It was called Parallel Love, the story of a band called Luxury. So I did a little digging before I actually saw the film, because their heyday was in the mid-90s when I was fully immersed in radio at that point, and I kept thinking, why did I never hear about them? Because they were being poised as this next big thing. They were from Georgia. They were really odd in the sense that they kept describing them as if Morrissey fronted Fugazi. That, you know, the punk rock elements were all there, but this sort of beautiful voiced singer with these sexually ambiguous lyrics, and he was really a showman. And they had these followings, and the people who were their fans would dress up, and they could always find their friends in a crowd because this was their thing. The band, I should say too, the band actually admits that Luxury is a terrible name. It is kind of a weird name. But anyways, so I got the documentary, and yes, as I had heard, it's like this very Fugazi-like DC punk vibe going on, and then the singer, Lee, who was much like Morrissey, singing about very sensitive things and some controversial things, they ended up playing a festival, and they got signed to a Christian rock label, which is called Tooth and Nail. And a lot of their contemporaries and friends and bands had said, don't sign to a Christian label. They themselves were Christians, but they did not consider themselves a Christian rock band. So it was a little problematic from the very beginning. They only had their CDs sold in Christian bookstores. They did include lyrics in the albums, and some of the lyrics were, like I said, they were sort of sexually ambiguous, and people would return the record. It was unfortunate, I guess, in a way that it got pigeonholed that, because even the band members themselves would say, we're not a Christian rock band. Maybe we just jumped at the first person who offered us a deal. Well, they were really on the cusp of some success. I mean, gaining crowds, gaining all kinds of other punk bands, you know, admiration. Leaving a gig one night, the band in one van, some other members in a van following behind with the gear. Horrific car accident. Horrific. I held my breath through that entire part because the descriptions of each and every one of them and where they landed or shot out of a window, all intents and purposes, they should have probably all died in this crash. A long road to recovery, and one kind of curious thing is that in the documentary then we just skip to them playing again. So I'm not sure how long their recovery was, but they go back and they play, and the fans start noticing, well, this is a little different. It's a little more introspective. But other people saying, yeah, how could it not be? They had these near-death experiences. It's making them reevaluate their lives. But the sound was sort of similar, but the records didn't sell very much. And they sort of each kind of went off into their own thing. Long story short, that 3 of the members became Eastern Orthodox priests. And they can draw parallels to joining this priesthood with being in their band. And I think they all looked at it as an outlet of creative expression and understanding the bigger questions, and that musicians do as well. And it was just one of these things where, I mean, I wanted to really love the direction they were going in after the accident and after they had this sort of epiphany, but I wasn't as big a fan of the music. But it was such an interesting story. They go into the 3 lives of the priests, the Orthodox priests, and about the ritual. They said, you know, it's no different than setting up for a show. You get your amps and your gear and stuff. Well, I'm building an altar, and I'm getting the incense, and I'm doing this. It's a little surreal at times. They're very funny. They have really great senses of humor about all of this. But they go back in the studio to play as priests, and it's just really interesting, because I think at the end of the documentary, my favorite part was that they asked one of the members' wives, they said, so, were Luxury a Christian rock band? And she said, how can I say that they weren't after all of this? Yet that was the one thing they were fighting against that maybe stood in the way of their success. But it's so worth checking out, and I hope that it's going to have a Netflix release. So again, Parallel Love, the story of a band called Luxury. Morrissey fronting Fugazi.